Hey everybody, welcome to Digital River. My name is Venkat Guhasan. I've been a software developer and architect for over 25 years. And in this channel, we're going to take a look at all things related to technology. So, with that, let's dive into today's episode. So, when you're traveling abroad, you have two options. One, you can either use your local provider's international data roaming, which costs a lot of money, or you could end up, buying a SIM card locally for the place you're traveling to. In my case, I went for the second option, and so with that, I purchased a brand new phone that had 5G capable, 5G capable, and yet when I reached there, I did not get any of my performance that I was seeking. So, in this episode, I'm going to cover all the details on how you can avoid a costly mistake like I did. So, before we dive in, keep in mind that my focus in this article is on India. And over the last couple of years, you heard about all the 5G spectrum that's coming to India and being launched. There was a very big auction that went on in India last year or a couple of years ago, and they kind of renewed it again, and it was put out on auction for lots and lots of money. And so, I'm thinking, the 5G coverage is there. I did all the research, and no, I also ended up buying a brand new phone. This one is a Bold N2, which definitely has a 5G coverage. And so I was all ready and prepared to go. I landed and dropped in the SIM card available from Airtel, and to my surprise, it did not work. So in the next slide, we're going to cover the details around that. So when I turned it on, and instead of, I expected to see a 5G, and all I got was an E. And so I quickly asked the Airtel agent, and they're like, you know what, it's not us, it's your phone. We have plenty of people coming in here and getting SIM cards, and they all get 5G. It's just something wrong with your phone. So my quick thought was, maybe I ended up with a bad phone. But I realized that it's a brand new phone. It's a top of the line phone from Blue Bold. And so I began to research, and I quickly discovered that in terms of the E stands for Edge, Enhanced Data Rates for GSM Evolution. And we all seen in our day to day, at some point in time we saw LTE in our phones before 5G became readily available. And so I was quickly learned that E is way below 3G. The one step below that is 2G, and above 3G is you have LTE, and then you have 4G and 5G, which is today, and 6G is being rolled out in a year or two across the world. And so with that, I was not even getting any data at all, and I was not in a remote area. I was actually in a metropolitan city when this issue happened, and so I quickly began to look into it, and what I've discovered is a four-step process that is required for every phone that you purchase to do this. And I'm going to cover all the four steps in step by step, and I'll go into all the details in the future slides coming up. So let's look at step one. You want to make sure that your phone is GSM capable. Step two is make sure it is unlocked. Step three is what we're going to cover in this episode, which is to make sure the right network bands are supported in your phone, in your particular device that you purchased. The next optional step is to make sure that if there is band specific allocation that is specific to the regional areas. And in India, it is state by state. You want to make sure that the band supported by your phone has regional state by state band available on your phone. So those are the four basic steps. And in all the slides coming up, you're going to cover each one of these four steps in detail. In the US, there's basically two different networks. You have GSM and CDMA. So companies like and India is fully GSM. So if you happen to have, if you purchased a phone from T-Mobile or AT&T, chances are it is a GSM supported phone. But on the other hand, if you purchased a phone from a company like Verizon or Sprint PCS in America, it is CDMA. And so this phone will not work. On the other hand, if you purchased a phone from like an Amazon vendor like Amazon or somewhere online, eBay, then you need to make sure that the phone is a GSM phone and not a CDMA phone. The next thing to keep in mind as a step two is that the phone is unlocked. So most carriers in the US have their phones locked. For example, in T-Mobile, if you purchase a phone from T-Mobile, their device will be locked by default. And they do that for two steps. One is to make sure that you don't jump from one carrier to the other as soon as you get that free phone. Second, it is locked for to ensure that other hackers do not take over your phone unnecessarily. And so if you purchased, a phone from either T-Mobile, or a GSM phone from one of the carriers, make sure that it is unlocked. The next step to keep in mind is step three, which is to make sure the right network brand is supported. What I mean by that is, uh, again, keep in mind it's India, we're looking at GSM specific. So within the 5G spectrum, they have allocated multiple slots across the frequency spectrum, and they use aliases or short names given to each one of the spectrum. Call it, in this case, they call it N71, N28, N20, N8, N3, N1, N30, N40, N41, N78, and N258. Keep in mind that if you're in the US, these numbers would be totally different, and the frequencies that are supported in the US are totally different compared to India. So when India went ahead with choosing a 5G band for their spectrum, these are the ones that they used. And the why they used it is a whole nother episode that we'll talk about in one of the future episodes. But here are the bands that are currently being used in India for 5G. But what they've done is they auctioned these off to Telefonica or telecom companies like Airtel, Jio, and Vodafone, and they're also auctioned off at a state level. So in general, you can say if you purchased a phone that has these particular bands, then the chances are if you're working with Airtel, then as long as they have N8, N3, and N1 plus N78 and N258, your phone's going to work fine. Similarly, if you have Geo and you have N28 and N20, N3 plus these two here, then chances are it's going to work. And same with Vodafone as well, as long as you have these three here and these three here. But also keep in mind, we're going to cover in the next slide, which is state specific coverages. And I'll tell you how to go about looking it up in the next slide. Keep in mind, again, we're talking about India and GSM, and also bear in mind that this is an optional step. It is not required. As long as you have general coverage as outlined in the previous slide, you're good to go. So What they've done is in India back in, a long time ago, I believe in 1978, when the telecom industry was booming in India or started up in India, they divided the entire country and all the states into these major categories here. And the bans are specific to each one of these regions. And within each band, every state gets to pick, auction through the auction process, the telecom, which bands they could use. So we're looking at basically, in this case, four major telecom circles. A metropolitan, which is outlined here in big countries. You have category A, B, and C, which are defined here based on the areas that have a lot of growth in terms of telecom versus the areas that have very little growth in the telecom industry. So you could see category A, as defined by this red color, has a really large, quick growth of, telecom industry, and so they categorized it as category A. Whereas, for example, category C, which is on the yellow regions here at the edges, they don't have a lot of coverages and so on. And so the bands are available cheaper for in the auction process in this area because they want to promote the telecom industries to flourish also in those area. Thereby, they make it cheap to for the telecom industry to buy those bands and use them in those areas. But also keep in mind the other factor is that these are country or states that are sharing their border boundaries with neighboring countries. For example, if you look at all of this here, you're kind of like landlocked in your own in water, your water, you're right next to the ocean. Whereas here, the areas are landlocked. So in this side, you're sharing it with Tibet and China and so on. And so here, the bans are very, very strictly defined on what you can use to make sure you don't have any overlapping in terms of the regional bans that are supported. So, again, keep in mind that it is distributed between the bands are allocated and purchased by Airtel, Reliance, Vodafone, and BSNL across the board. But for our conversation, we are not going to talk about BSNL because BSNL is a national telecom provider in India, and therefore, for all purposes, when I if I go to India, I am not going to be able to buy a BSNL SIM card. I can only buy a SIM card from these three telecom providers for me to use. And so I'm not going to cover the BSNL scenario in this slide deck, but that is an option available to people who are citizens of India. So to determine, what your phone has, the best place to go that I've been able to find is GSM Arena. And keep in mind that this is not something that, it's not my site. It is not something that I am affiliated with in any shape or form. This just happens to be one of the sites that I found that had all the cell phones I was looking for to see if it had support. And so let's take a look at, quickly about how to go about using that site. Once again, you know what? All of this I've talked about is captured in my blog at digitalriver.blog. But let's quickly dive into uh, GSM Arena. And there, when you go into it, you can simply, plug in your phone model in the search here. And you will see that it gives you all the details about the phone. And keep in mind that this is a great resource for even looking at other things as far as when was this phone released, how old is this phone, what are all the different camera features, and so on. But the one particular thing we're going to focus on here is the network section. First of all, you can see that it has GSM capable and LTE capable, along with 5G, which is the underlying overarching concern that we had. Now, if you click on this little expand here, it will quickly give you or dive into all of the bands that are implemented on the chipset on your phone. So in this case, you can see it has, I'm going to zoom in here, for ease of viewing. You could see here it has 1, 3, 5, 7, 8, and so on. So if you go back to the slide deck that we have, you can quickly see which one of these are supported by that particular telecom provider. So I will cover that in the next slide, but you can see here as an example. Similarly, I'm going to look at the blue bold N2, and you can see it's much smaller in subset, and the numbers are very different. So I believe this phone is actually it's built for a different country, and it does work in the United States, but it did not work for me in India, as an example. So that's how you would go about determining exactly what network bands are available on your phone. So here in this slide that I put together, I've given you a good example and a bad example, and we're going to compare them side by side so you could get a good understanding of what's going on. So here is the 5G band supported by a Samsung Galaxy A25. I know a lot of my family friends use the Galaxy A25 in India, so I know that it works. And here's a bad example of how it did not fit my bill for India. Um, it may work very well in another country, maybe Europe and so on, but for me in India, this combination of bands did not work. And so in the next slide, you could see for Airtel, because that's my SIM card that I had, you could see that it had an overlapping regions of bands for 1, 3, 8, and 78. So that's about 4 different bands. On top of that, it also has 4G, 2G, LTE, and so on. So it gives you a pretty broad coverage, you could say, in India for this particular phone. And so that's the trick to look for when you're actually purchasing a phone to prepare for your trip ahead. So once again, keep in mind, how do you apply this to the countries you're traveling? Again, the rule is very simple. Go to one of these websites, and I recommend here GSM Arena. Look for the phone you're going to buy and make sure it supports the band, and then Google to see if those bands are applicable and available in the country you're traveling to. That's pretty much, the full summary or full scope of what you want to, do when you're traveling. Now, these are the different pages that you can go to look up to see, as an example. So I'm going to go ahead and click on one of these. And here's a table that comes up for Airtel India. And keep in mind, Airtel is a very large company that is pretty much in every foreign country you can think of, uh, and including India. So within India, Airtel has implemented these particular bands, and you can see here it has a very broad LTE allocation, but also on the um, NR, which stands for New Radio, they have implemented bands N78 and N258. And if you go back to the previous slide, you can see here N78 and N258 is a broad coverage, but here you can also see 1, 3, and 8, which are covered in, let me switch back um, and slide this down. So you can see here bands, 1, 3, 8 are also covered here in this. So whenever I'm operating on these bands, it'll be displayed as LTE or 5G. But when it's definitely falling over, it'll be 4G and other bands as defined. So that's the idea in a nutshell. So once again, I'll put all these links in the description down below. I hope that this episode has been useful to you. If it is, click on the bell icon down below and subscribe. I also welcome your comments. and critiques on how I could improve upon this video. And I also post a text only version of the same video on my blog at digitalriver.blog. So please visit that. And once again, thank you so much for tuning in.